It is Friday, which means it's our day to have some time together. And our time together is going to be most appropriately spent with a wonderful book from my favorite group of books that Story and Song is carrying, the Notting Hill edition. This one is Happy Half Hours, Selected Writings of A. Milne, with an introduction by Frank Cottrell-Boyce. Now, just a word. Some of you may be aware of who Alexander Milne is, i.e. A. Milne. He wrote that book that a lot of us have carried with us from childhood into adulthood, Winnie the Pooh. Oh, and he did so many other things too. But Frank Cottrell-Boyce may not be familiar to you. He was a children's novelist who won the Carnegie Mellon for his first book, Millions, in 2004, and the Guardian Children's Fiction Prize for The Unforgotten Coat in 2013. But it's something that happened in 2017 that brought him to my attention, and it was the movie Goodbye, Christopher Robin. And now, Connor has shared with you or will share with you, a old picture of A. Milne sitting in a wing chair, getting ready to light his smoke up, as it were. I want to read something specific to you from the introduction, which I thought was quite astounding, really. Think about this. Overwhelming success is harder to deal with than failure. At least failure has an element of hope in it. Success asserts a huge gravitational pull from which it's almost impossible to achieve and escape velocity. Look how Conan Doyle struggled with Sherlock Holmes, how Steve Coogan keeps going back to the Alan Partridge, how J.K. Rowling keeps returning to the Potter universe. Milne never returned. His refusal to dilute the legacy is partly why the colors of the 100-acre wood are so fresh. He walked out of the trees, up to Galleon's Leap, and out into the world. Then he tried to stop a war. The man who invented Winnie the Pooh said that the book he was most proud of writing was Peace with Honor, an anti-war polemic written in 1934. Nowadays, the whole idea of campaigning for appeasement in the 1930s has such a bad reputation that it's easy to forget that Milne was not the only one to argue against going to war with Nazi Germany. The book was a bestseller. You can feel how passionately he felt about this just by looking at the sheer rhetorical firepower he brings to the field. Scenes, sketches, aphorisms, statistics. It's a compelling read, not the least because Milne is genuinely wrangling with his conscience, trying to find a way of squaring his love of his country with his hatred of war. Of course, by the time the true nature of Nazism became clear, he had to renounce or modify his pacifism. In the sequel to Peace and Honor, War with Honor, clearly there's something ridiculous about performing such a flip-flop, but you have to admire the honesty and the energy with which he tried to think through his change of mind. War with Honor is an angry, hectic book, Reading it is like watching a smartly dressed gent desperately wrestling with a well-oiled snake. Oh, while trying to keep his tie straight. This is a book calling for peace in which the harshest words are aimed at conscientious objectors, and the most hope is pinned on the atomic bomb. The only logical protest for a conscientious objector who refuses to take part is suicide, preferably at sea, so that the war effort shall not be interrupted by the need for burying the body. The atomic bomb, on the other hand, fills him with hope for a better world. Part of the thrill of the book is reading a man whose urbane voice normally comes at us from the nursery or the Garrick Club, wrangling with an unusually apoplectic version of nuclear deterrence. In the 1920s, he says, everyone was a pacifist. He talks about the optimism of the League of Nations and votes for women, for peace under the banner of hope. Here he is holding out for peace under the banner of planetary destruction. What Milne is really struggling with here is the clash between the crisp, clean principles and the murky, tempestuous nature of a fallen world. What can a writer bring to such a world? Now, Milne had already answered that with the 100-Acre Wood. Children's books of the 1920s are thronged with children who never grow up, led, of course, by Barrie's eternal Pan. But Christopher Robin is different. In the 100-Acre Woods, Christopher Robin is the grown-up, dispensing wisdom and help, solving problems, putting things right. Oh, he's a boy at the very end of childhood, aware that this is soon going to end. That's why everything shimmers with its own transience. In the difficult, distracting, dangerous world into which he is heading when he walks beyond the wood. And in the end, the boy is off to another war. The best writer can do is to bring the good things to our attention, to help us hold them in our hearts and memories, so that when we need them, those little things, sorting out your books, picking a new bathroom, the honey and the humming, can be our stepping stones through bad times. The joke in Vespers is that the little boy who is supposedly praying is in fact distracted by everything from bath water to dressing gowns. But another way of looking at it is to say that the boy was sure that everything from bath water to dressing gowns was important and had its own place in the mind of God or of the universe. Everything matters. Everything in life is worth looking at. Milne's gift to write amusingly about the most trivial things is far from trivial. It's a kind of blessing, the kind that you can put back together again when all else fails. Now that was from Frank Cottrell-Boyce. Something from the pen of A. Milne. Titled Literary Life, My Library. When I moved into a new house a few weeks ago, my books, as was natural, moved with me. Strong, perspiring men shoveled them into packing cases and staggered with them to the van, cursing Caxton as they went. On arrival at this end, they staggered with them into the room selected for my library, heaved off the lids of the cases, and awaited orders. The immediate need was for an emptier room. Together we hurried the books into the new white shelves which awaited them, the order in which they stood being of no matter so long as they were off the floor. Armful after armful was hastily stacked, the only pause being when, in the curious ways in which these things happen, my own name suddenly caught the eye of the foreman. "Did you write this one, sir?" he asked. I admitted it. He said, non-committally. He glanced along the names of every armful after that, and appeared a little surprised at the number of books which I hadn't written. An easy-going profession, evidently. So we got the books up at last. And there they are still. I told myself that when a wet afternoon came along, I would arrange them properly. When the wet afternoon came, I told myself I would arrange them one of these fine mornings. As they are now, I have to look along every shelf in search for the book which I want. To come to Keats is no guarantee that we are on the road to Shelley. Shelley, if he did not drop out on the way, is probably next to How to Be a Golfer, Though Middle-Aged. Having written as far as this, I had to get up and see where Shelley really was. Oh, it's worse than I thought. He is between geometrical optics and studies in New Zealand scenery. Ella Wheeler Wilcox, whom I find myself to be entertaining unawares, sits besides Anarchy or Order, which was apparently sent in the hope that you will become a member of the Duty and Discipline movement. A vain hope it would seem, for I have not yet paid my subscription. What I found out by an English governess shares a corner with the recreations of a country parson. They are followed by Villette and Baedeker's Switzerland. Oh, something will have to be done about that. But I am wondering what is to be done. If I gave you the impression that my books were precisely arranged in their old shelves, I misled you. They were arranged in the order known as all anyhow. Possibly they were a little less anyhow than they are now, in that the volumes of any particular work were at least together, but that is all that can be claimed for them. For years I put off the business of tidying them up, just as I am putting it off now. Oh, it's not laziness. Well, it's simply I don't know where to begin. Now let us suppose that we decide to have all the poetry together. Oh, now that sounds reasonable. But then Byron is 11 inches high, my tallest poet, and Beattie, my shortest, is just over 4 inches. Now, how foolish will they look standing side by side? Perhaps you don't know Beattie. Oh, but I assure you, he was a poet. He wrote those majestic lines. The shepherd swain of whom I mention made, on Scotia's mountains fed his little flock. The sickle, scythe, or plough he never swayed, an honest heart was almost all his stock. Now, of course, one would hardly expect a shepherd to sway a plough in the ordinary way, but Beatty was quite right to remind us that Edwin didn't either. Edwin was the name of the shepherd swain, and yet poor Edwin was no vulgar boy. We are told a little further on in a line that should live. Well, having satisfied you that Beatty really was a poet, I can now return to my argument that an 11-inch Byron cannot stand next to a 4-inch Beatty and be followed by an 8-inch Cowper without making the shelf look silly. Yet how can I discard Beatty? Beatty, who wrote, "And now the downy cheek and deepened voice gave dignity to Edwin's blooming prime." Well, now you see the difficulty. If you arrange your books according to their contents, you are sure to get an untidy shelf. Now, if you arrange your books according to their size and color, you get an effective wall. But the poetically inclined visitor may lose sight of the Beatty altogether. Before then, we decide what to do about it. We must ask ourselves that very awkward question. Why do we have books on our shelves at all? It is a most embarrassing question to answer. Of course, you think that the proper answer, in your own case, is an indignant protest that you bought them in order to read them, and that you put them on your shelves in order that you could refer to them when necessary. A little reflection will show you what a stupid answer that is. If you only want to read them, why are some of them bound in Morocco and half-calf and other expensive coverings? Why did you buy a first edition when a 100th edition was so much cheaper? Why have you got half a dozen copies of the Rubaiyat? What is the particular value of this other book that you treasure it so carefully? Why, the fact that its pages are uncut. If you cut the pages and read it, the value would go down. So, then, your library is not just for reference. You know as well as I do that it furnishes your room, that it furnishes it more effectively than does paint or mahogany or china. Of course, it is nice to have the books there so that one can refer to them when one wishes. One may be writing an article on sea bathing, for instance, and have come to the sentence which begins, "In the well-remembered words of Coleridge, perhaps almost too familiar to be quoted." And then one may have to look them up. On these occasions, a library is not only ornamental but useful, but do not let us be ashamed that we find it ornamental. Indeed, the more I survey it, the more I feel that my library is sufficiently ornamental as it stands. Any reassembling of the books might spoil the color scheme. Pericus, Switzerland, and Villette are both red, a color which is neatly caught up again after an interlude of blue by a volume of Browning and Jevon's elementary logic. We had a woman here only yesterday who said, "How pretty your books look," and I am inclined to think that that is good enough. There is a careless rapture about them which I should lose if I started to arrange them methodically. But perhaps I might risk this to the extent of getting all their heads the same way up. Oh, yes, on one of these fine days, or wet nights, I shall take my library seriously in hand. There are still one or two books which are the wrong way round. I shall put them right way around. And now, as for libraries go, I'm going to tell you about a journey I had through my apartment. I looked at the bookshelves, and what did I find? But a folio edition, the complete poems for Christopher Robin. Now, these were illustrated by E.H. Shepard. And I'm going to read you a few of the poems that A.A. Milne wrote. One, for which there is an illustration attached, is called Happiness. Look at the pictures carefully. John had a great big waterproof boots on. John had a great big waterproof hat. John had a great big waterproof mackintosh. And that, said John, is that. My goodness, there he is, mackintosh, hat, and waltzing to the end of the pond, looking at the geese. Milne loved to explore the land of childhood. I love this. Politeness. At the head of this is a picture you can't see unless you go get the book that has the original drawings in it by Shepard. But it's a little girl, or actually the back of a little girl with a plaid dress and little blue knickers and little blue shoes and the most glorious shadow behind her. Politeness. If people ask me, now I always tell them, "Oh, quite well, thank you. I'm very glad to say." If people ask me, well, I always answer, "Quite well, thank you. And how are you today?" Oh, I always answer. I always tell them, if they ask me politely. But sometimes I really wish they wouldn't. And now, here is one. Use your imagination. A dark line of trees, a meadow and a little child, and coming out of the dark line of trees is a knight in armor, full regalia. His horse draped with a panoply of checkered cloth. Oh, what a vision. It's called Knights and Ladies. There is, in my old picture book, a page at which I like to look, where knights and squires come riding down the cobbles of some steep old town, and ladies, from beneath the eaves, flutter their bravest handkerchiefs, or, smiling proudly, toss down the gauges. But that was in the Middle Ages. Oh, it wouldn't happen now. But still, whenever I look up the hill, where dark against the green and blue, the firs come marching two by two, I wonder if perhaps I might see suddenly a shining knight winding his way from blue to green exactly as it would have been those many, many years ago. Perhaps I might. Well, you never know. Oh, and this one. I've always had an affinity for stuffed toy bears. It goes back to my Pooh fixation of many years ago. And in this, there's Pooh looking from the doorway, oh, you'll love this, of a library, chock-a-block full of books, looking at Christopher Robin, who's trying to fix his braces, one of which is not very well attached. It's called Us Two. Wherever I am, there's always Pooh. There's always Pooh and me. Whatever I do, he wants to do. Where are you going today? Says Pooh. Well, that's very odd, 'cause I was too. Let's go together, says Pooh, says he. Let's go together, says Pooh. What's twice 11? I said to Pooh. Twice what? Said Pooh to me. Well, I think it ought to be 22. Oh, just what I think myself, said Pooh. It wasn't an easy sum to do, but that's what it is, said Pooh. That's what it is, said Pooh. Oh, let's look for dragons, I said to Pooh. Oh, yes, let's, said Pooh to me. We crossed the river, and we found a few. Yes, those are dragons, all right, said Pooh. As soon as I saw their beaks, I knew. That's what they are, said Pooh, said he. That's what they are, said Pooh. Ah, let's frighten the dragons, I said to Pooh. That's right, said Pooh to me. I'm not afraid, I said to Pooh, and I held his paw and shouted, Shoo! Silly old dragons! Ah! And off they flew. I wasn't afraid, said Pooh, said he. I'm never afraid with you. So, wherever I am, there's always Pooh. There's always Pooh and me. What would I do, I said to Pooh, if it wasn't for you? And Pooh said, True, it isn't much fun for one, but two can stick together, says Pooh, says he. That's how it is, says Pooh. And gloriously the last illustration shows Christopher Robin heading up the staircase, handing each baluster, and on the steps is Pooh, clambering up as only a toy bear can do, from step to step, trying to keep up. And another, actually, two more, they're short. Wind on the hill. No one can tell me, nobody knows where the wind comes from, where the wind goes. It's flying from somewhere as fast as it can. I couldn't keep up with it, not if I ran. But if I stopped holding the string of my kite, it would blow with the wind for a day and a night. And then when I found it, wherever it blew, I should know that the wind had been going there too. So then I could tell them where the wind goes. But where the wind comes from, nobody knows. And finally we come to the end. When I was 1, I had just begun. When I was 2, I was nearly new. When I was 3, I was hardly me. When I was 4, I was not much more. When I was 5, I was just alive. But now I'm 6. I'm as clever. So I think I'll be 6 now, forever and ever. And now, to all of my 6-year-old friends, we'll call it quits for this Friday, and we'll find something delicious to read for next Friday. Till then, stay safe.